They were very useful artifacts of the late 18th and right throughout the 19th century.
Yes.
Because every young lady used them to write little billets doux to her loved one, wherever they were. And they travelled around with them. Hence this being really very robustly made in rosewood with brass inlay.
Yes.
What's fun about these is everything that goes on inside them. Have you explored it at all?
Well, yes, I actually know there's a secret drawer.
Oh, is there?
Yes.
It's predictably not so secret. Let's have a look. It's probably in here. Ah, but you see, that's more interesting than the secret drawer.
See, yes.
To have something like that on a piece of furniture or a little artifact makes it much more of a collector's piece, because I see hundreds without labels or with any names at all.
Yes.
And we don't know who made them. But this chap, D. Edwards, is actually quite well known, because I think it's got the royal appointment there. And because of that, there's quite a lot of documentation about him.
Oh, yes.
It's Regency and sums up that late Georgian, pre-Victorian period of the Regency.
Yes.
Perfectly. So where's the secret drawer? In there?
I think it's here now. I'm not quite sure.
Let's have a look.
I hope I get this right. No, I think you're right.
There?
Yes, that's it.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, they're not so secret now. We've seen them before. But
yes.
Any secrets in here? No gold coins tucked away you've forgotten about or anything like that. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that. That's the very best English craftsmanship. Mahogany line drawers. I mean, extraordinary. The detail on those dovetails. They're minute.
Yes.
Tiny dovetails. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, incredible work. And all that detail for something that is essentially an everyday working little writing box. Now, let's see if we can close it. I'm passionate about labelled furniture. I love it. It's such fun because it's the only record we have in English furniture about the makers of these pieces of furniture.
Yes, yes.
Where did you get this?
My husband acquired it at auction in County Cavan, that's in Southern Ireland. And I believed it belonged at that time to it was a clergyman's auction. And actually there was some oats inside it. That was the only thing, oats.
Right.
So he probably carried it around collecting his dues or whatever.
From the local
From the
parish.
local, yes.
What did it cost at auction? How long ago was it?
It's 20 years
20 years
ago.
And so what did it cost then?
£7 or around £7 something.
Today, in a shop in London, very collectible, and before Christmas or something like that as a Christmas present, I can see someone paying certainly £650 for it.
He'll be astounded when he hears it, really.
Do you know anything about them?
Not a thing, just that they've been in my grandparents' home for as long as I ever remember.
Well, the subjects are not difficult to identify because it says on the bottom, Widow and Elijah, and they are a classic combination of figures that you find often in the late 18th century, made in many factories, and which arose from the sort of low church movement and Methodism, made probably by somebody called Obadiah Sherrod. The only pity is that as we see them now, they're not as they left Mr. Sherrod's factory. Because if you look here, there probably was a tree, some bocage, coloured branches up behind. And the same occurs on him. And more seriously, I'm afraid, almost certainly they stood this much off the ground and the little bracket feet have gone. Most of these you find sort of slightly raised up, and you can see, in fact, that he tips forward a bit because he's been chopped off unevenly. But there were feet on each corner here, which is a great pity, because if they were absolutely perfect with their feet and with their bocage, the flowering trees up here, they would be really expensive. Well, I say really expensive. Perhaps £2,000 to £3,000 a pair. But I think still probably worth six to £800.
Oh, that's very interesting.
It is Irish.
Yes.
It's Dublin, and there we are. So we've got
West. Dublin,
they were a very important Dublin firm in the 19th century, sort of second half of the 19th century, beginning of this century. And what we've got there, in fact, is West retailer's mark stamped there, and the maker's mark, let's just get the right one, is that one. It's an interesting thing with Irish silver, that you quite often get this, where you get a maker's mark and then a retailer's mark. And really, when I first saw this, I thought, gosh, 1850. It's got to be 1850. So they're copying around 1915, well, in 1915, that 1850s style. This pear shape, very typical. I love the castings, the animal's head there, and then the mask underneath. And on the 4 feet, I always think actually they look a bit like primeval monsters. You know, you can sort of almost imagine them plunging through some primeval forest on those legs with that great head there and so on. And the handle, that's interesting actually. With the silver handle, what of course you normally see are great big bits of ivory insulation. But in there, the silver is butting of the main part of the handle. There's a join just there and there, right? And they're butting up together. Now, when I first saw that, I thought, gosh, somebody has broken the ivory and put it back. But the condition is such that I don't think that's the case. And it's borne out by the fact that
it's in the others as well.
it's exactly the same here. So with that, not on those, because there's no need for it. But there, that's quite an unusual way of doing it. So if we were to unpin it, I don't suggest you do that. But you'll find a bit of ivory set inside.
That was probably to strengthen the...
Not for strength, no. It was because silver's the best conductor of heat that there is. So if you didn't have it there, you'd have to wear gloves to pick it up, which wouldn't be that practical. So, 1915, copying 1850s, but cracking good condition. I mean, you're obviously looking after it very well. And well, I think to insure it, I would put, what, £2,500 on it.
Hello, what have you got there? What piece of jewellery? Coins?
Coin and a little card portrait type thing.
Okay. Take the... Curiously, our specialist on coins also does the arms militaria. It sounds a bit cockeyed, but that's the pack.
Well, you've got the Christmas card, which is fair enough. And then there's the tobacco. That's an ounce of tobacco. There's the 20 cigarettes, a few missing. But you haven't got the photograph of Princess Mary, a sepia-coloured photograph. And of course, the all-essential thing is the bullet pencil.
When they got the cigarettes, they didn't get the bullet pencil, sure. The non-smokers got the bullet pencil.
No. The bullet pencil went in between the cigarettes and the tobacco.
Did it? Yeah.
And in fact, on some of them, they had a piece of card in the bottom, and the bullet pencil slipped through the card.
Yes, the box I have at home now has the plain cardboard.
So there you are. But as it is now, I mean, you're looking at something worth in relation to £50.
It's called a lantern clock, but the trouble is that the movements for the lantern clocks are the same movements as they have for the 30-hour-long case clocks. And I have to tell you that I think sometime in the past this has been, I think, put together. The wheelwork and the centre part of it's 18th century. Probably late 18th century. But I'm not very happy on the rest of it. Still probably worth £500–600, but no, I wouldn't pass that off as being considered.
If they've got the bullet pencil, £100 more. So let's have a look, see what we've got. Now, you've got the Christmas card. This is the rarity. This is it.
You can get it apart.
What it was, the men in the trenches, a lot of them just kept this. But what they did do, they took out this to write their letters home. And of course, these either got lost, broken, lost in the mud in the trenches in Flanders, and very rare.
Well, of course, the thing is, we've got to do a little bit of investigating here because this sort of piece of furniture, there we come, that looks all right. This sort of furniture is so much in demand and has been broken and copied over the years that to establish that it is old is quite an important thing. Lovely colour underneath. I like the disc here. Those are 3 old screws. I don't think they've ever been moved. Wonderful colour, nice colour. The turning is good. I'm going to pop that down here. Now, Yes, that part. You see, that tray actually lifts off, and then you start again, and the other bits are separate. It's been some while since that was taken to pieces, but it does, but of natural dust. It does give us an opportunity to look at the variation in colour, where it's very dry inside there, as it should be, and then you get this beautiful patination from years of use. Now, the trouble is with these dumbwaiters, and as you know, it's called a dumbwaiter, for the very simple reason that it enabled people to put extra dishes, perhaps a cheese course, in the dining room, which they could wheel around behind them and not worry about being indiscreet. Whereas if you talked about private things in front of the staff, you were prone to blackmail in the 18th century. And so it is literally a dumb waiter, and a very popular item too. Now, I'm going to turn it right over, and we'll just balance it on its top there. Look at this wonderful plate under here. That's totally original. All those nails are handmade, what we call clout nails. The head's flattened little pieces of iron, and then a rather crudely cut triform plate. Absolutely right. Under here you can see the rough marking of where they sort of filed away, if you like, the surface, but it was never going to be seen, and it was left fairly rough and unfinished. The casters fitted in beautifully. This old gilding round there, absolutely marvellous. Mercurial gilding on those lovely casters. So what we've got is an extremely good dumbwaiter, 1775, 1785, and a lovely three-splay base. And an important feature is that the cup turning is the same, simply getting bigger all the way down. You know, these three pieces, or furniture that comes to pieces like this, you've got 6 bits, they must all be compatible. And over the years, they've often got split up. That's why this is such a nice and rare example. And of course, the important thing is that you've got a pair, and an identical pair to it. Look at that. Now, it's many, many years since I've seen a pair. One of these would probably make in the region of £5,500 to £6,000.
Oh,
a pair as important as this should be insured for £15,000.
Oh, goodness, that is a really...
Well, they're just a wonderful, wonderful lot, and it's a joy to see them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving me all that.
Thank you.
Detail.
You've got here the town arms, the Enniskillen towers, the harp, the Irish harp, and crown above, the arms again, and the Rose of England. On the top, you have the orb with the cross, again a symbol of authority, and you've got the most wonderful arms on the top here of Queen Anne. Now, we know from the marks on here, there and there, and there, that this particular mace was made by David King in, well, between 1706 and 1708 in Dublin. David King was apprenticed in 1681, and in fact became master of the company in 1699. So that gives you a measure of his importance. Now, I believe that he, in fact, was a Fermanagh man.
He was a member of a well-known Fermanagh family.
Oh, right. So it is possible that he himself might have donated the mace to the corporation at the time.
There's quite a possibility that he did at the time.
Well, if so, that makes it doubly interesting. On the stem here, you've got light engraving, which twists round, lovely sort of fluid feeling to it. Again, with these little brackets at the top here. It is a perfect example of a mayoral mace. It's a very, very difficult thing to put a value on because it's not the sort of piece of silver that collectors would go for because there's so few of them about that there's no real market as such. On the other hand, it is a highly important piece of Queen Anne silver. Do you happen to know what it's insured for at the moment?
No,
you don't. No. Well, I would think that if you wanted to insure it, knowing that if it went, you'll be able to buy some other super piece of Queen Anne silver. I think you'd be looking between £150,000 and £200,000 today.
I don't think it's insured for that much money.
Well, Ireland's fine tradition of art is certainly not limited to the men. I mean, from the 18th century until today, and very important today, women have played a major part. And here we have a little watercolor by Mildred Ann Butler. Been long in the family?
Well, we're not quite sure, but we actually found it in an old folder down in the attic.
Really, Britain and Ireland didn't really know very much about Mildred Ann Butler until very recently, in the early 1880s. So here we have just exactly what she's become known for, a very fresh, pretty, bright, atmospheric watercolor, beautifully painted. I mean, it must have been a great thrill to you to find this.
Well, I think when we first found it, we didn't know that it was anything special.
But you had it framed?
We had it framed because we liked the picture.
And you've enjoyed it ever since?
And we've enjoyed it, yes.
You will find works by her in the Tate Gallery, the Ulster Museum, the National Gallery of Ireland. So she's highly considered.
Somebody came to the house one day and told us who the artist was, and that it was quite valuable.
Yes.
But we don't know how valuable. Perhaps you could tell us.
Well, the value is for insurance, what it would cost you to buy it in an art gallery, around £800 to £1,200. So you should be insuring it around £8,000, £1,200, something like that.
Well, this is all a great collection of Belique. What a wonderful sight to see here in Cardiff about it. This is all your collection?
Yeah, that's
How long have you been collecting it?
about 15, 20 years.
Have you really? Yeah. And I suppose some of these are very difficult to find now. What I've always admired about Belique in the porcelain, in this lovely Parian body, is this incredible translucence. You know, you can see through it so fantastically. And I think the quality is truly marvellous. And this is, of course, a moustache cup.
Yes.
For drinking if you had a great moustache. And you haven't got a moustache, so do you use it?
No.
The Americans like these. They have moustache clubs, and they collect these things, and they meet together, and they if they haven't got a moustache, they have to borrow one and put it on, and then they can drink from it. And they're determined to find a Belique left-handed moustache cup, and they, with the ledge on the other side. Have you ever seen one of those?
No, I've never seen.
They're very rare.
That looks at Britannia as well. So we've got a that rather dead sound. Yeah. But you see, that's not come through in the same way. It's survived rather better.
That's unusual.
It's very unusual.
1870, 1880. Rather sweet, but very unlike Belique, isn't it?
And there is no collector's value. The watch, 9-carat gold, is worth perhaps £100. Believe it or not, the chain, which is also gold, with another citrine. It's strange here in Ireland. Everybody likes these citrine seals. I've seen lots of them today. But the chain and the seal are probably worth between 120 and 150, because there's more demand for the chains than there actually is for the watches.
I think the pride of the thing is this wonderful large pot. Isn't that tremendous? My word, I think that's great. How long have you had this, Jack?
Not too long.
My word. There was one in an American catalogue, and it fetched over £1,000. The flower modelling is beautiful. I think this work of the flowers is absolutely marvellous. Every little petal separately made and built onto the flower, hand by hand by hand. I think it's a wonderful thing. Great tour de force of pottery.
Well, now we leave our experts just for a moment for me to tell you about the Radio Times competition. You'll remember each week you have the opportunity of winning an antiques voucher worth £2,500, which you can then spend on antiques of your choice. So it really is well worthwhile having a go. Before we look at this week's competition object, the answer to last week's poser. The question was, in which country was this rug made? And the answer is Persia, or as it's now known, Iran. This type of rug would have been made in the town of Kashan in northwest Persia, and it depicts the story of Bahram Gur from the 11th century Book of Kings, a great Persian classic. And so to this week's competition object, and here it is, a really magnificent ring. You'll see the centerpiece of it is this beautiful cabochon-cut emerald in a gold setting, which has been worked in fine detail, obviously by a highly skilled craftsman. The oval bezel there with its decorative borders is supported by 2 collared snake's heads. Now, a ring like this has a rather timeless quality about it. It looks old, and yet at the same time it's also striking enough to be fashionable today. It could have been made in Roman times, or on the other hand, at any period during the last 200 years, when these sort of ancient styles and designs have enjoyed a revival. So that really leads us to the question, at around what date was this ring made? Now, to enter the competition, you'll probably find it helpful to look at a copy of next week's Radio Times, which gives you more details and even so far as to suggest a few possible answers. And then your entry should be in the post and postmarked, please, before next Saturday to stand a chance of winning. Incidentally, your entry should be addressed to the Radio Times and not to the Antiques Roadshow. Well, that's it. Another competition object at the same time next week. In the meantime, back to our experts and the people of Enniskillen.
They're late George III,
Yes.
and they're actually old Sheffield plate,
Yes.
and in wonderful condition. Now, what's marvellous, first of all, you can have a small dinner party, a pair of candlesticks. And then go up a scale. So, putting the branches in. Then, let's take that one off. We've got, well, if we go to the first stage, actually, let's put that one in there. So now, lovely pair of two-light candelabra.
That's Christmas.
Christmas. But you can go further. These are detachable. So, when you want, three-light candelabra.
Yes. That's Christmas.
That's Christmas.
Yes.
Or, and that's ideal, obviously, for a nice oblong table.
Yes.
So then, on to, take it out. With that in there, a single four-light.
That's new.
But you can go further, because then you take that out, and you've got a five-light. So there's everything there that you really could possibly want. Everything from a pair of candlesticks, two-light, three-light, onto the single four-light, and then the single five-light. Super, because it's a wonderful thing to have survived in that sort of state. So, what about value?
Well, it's family, so it's only going to be...
Never really thought about it.
No.
I would say you've got to insure that for £1,500.
Really?
Really. It's lovely. It's lovely. Many thanks for bringing it in. I love it.
Thank you.
And what I think is particularly fascinating about this is the fact that you've quite clearly got this ripple decoration where they have cleverly joined the veneers together. It's a very, very thin slice of veneer. I mean, almost as thin as a piece of paper, machine-made, even in the Victorian period, machine-made. They join it together very craftily in this naturalistic way to make it blend in. So instead of having a hard, straight line. And all the best Victorian workshops did that. Now, this table is a reproduction table. It's not a Victorian one. Did you suspect that?
I didn't honestly know how old it would have been or if it was reproduction. I just didn't know.
Where did you get it from?
It's just been handed down in the family. I think it belonged to my great-grandmother.
Belonged to a great-grandmother?
That's what I have been told.
Right. Well, the trouble is family hearsay and family tradition can obviously often extend the date line quite considerably. Because quite frankly, I think this is no more than about 20 years old. And when I first glanced at it, I wasn't immediately suspicious at all. But when you get closer, the freshness of the colour, the fact that there's no depth of colour, there's no antique patination, as we call it, no years of dirty fingers, wax being spilt on it from candles, children scribbling on it, doing their homework, especially modern children with a biro, and just food being spilt on it, wiped over, and years of polishing. It doesn't have that patination, so that's the first thing that made me suspicious. But I think that the real giveaway, perhaps, is underneath. We just have a quick look underneath. Would you just help me with it? Just come around to the front a bit. We just tip him back. I think when you start looking at the underneath, if you've looked at underneath of any pieces of antique furniture, remembering this is supposed to be 1850, this has all been painted up to make it look like sort of false graining. It's artificially aged. It's not a fake, but it's been made just to sort of give it a bit of patination, and it's a bit dirty underneath. It's copied faithfully this sort of brass catch, which you would have on Georgian Victorian tables. But even the brass work doesn't have quite the depth of colour. It's not quite as robustly made as an antique one would be. The base, when you look at it, especially as it's got a bit dusty wherever it's been stored, again has this feeling of age. It's exactly faithful to the old ones of the 1850s, but it's more likely 1950. Have you any idea how much this is worth as a reproduction?
I haven't a clue.
Nothing at all. Well, an old table like this, an old Victorian one in this sort of good condition, and a good, big, generous 8-seater table, which is the key to these tables, would sell for a good at least £5,000, and that's probably being conservative. So you have a reproduction.
Right.
Let's call it a fake.
Yeah.
That horrible word. But even as a reproduction, I think it would cost you over £1,000 to buy second-hand, as this is, and more to buy a new copy.
Well, I have to say that when we came over to Northern Ireland, I didn't think one thing I was going to find today was a really good Dutch clock, but you certainly got one here. Perhaps the most interesting part about this clock is that you see them quite often. They're not great rarities, but it's not very big by Dutch standards. And although it looks large, if we start at the top, the usual Dutch marquetry clock, you have the figures. These have got good original figures, but you can get these clocks up to 2, even 3 feet higher than this, which makes them almost impossible to get into the average home. So when they come in a good small size, they are considerably rarer. But one interesting feature about Dutch clocks, as against English ones, is that the doors are made in a single piece, if we can take that now. You see, English would normally have a pleat across the top, which would stop it from bowing. For some reason, the Dutch clocks doors tend not to bend. They tend to keep their shape, but they're always made in a single piece. This is a very typical feature of Dutch work too, is the application of a panel on the door, which again represents Father Time, cast lenticle on the door. And again, absolutely classic Dutch work is the Bombay base with the claw and all feet. Now, I put the date of this case in the middle of the 18th century. And this man, Jan Kugi, who actually, his name is on the movement, and he is recorded as working in the late 17th century. This clock is clearly well into the 18th century, probably pushing towards the middle. It's so traditional Dutch work, it goes on, particularly the case marquetry, it goes right on through the 18th century. Even in the 19th century, they did a lot of this sort of work. A few interesting features, very typical of Dutch clocks. The spandrels, which represent the 4 seasons. We've got garland of flowers, the corn, the ripe corn, the wine harvest, and the cold winter with the fire. These are actually silver, by the way. We've got a moon phase, which is again typical, and beautiful engraving. They've engraved the clouds and a small castle. That's all engraved, silvered, and inset with black wax to give you the almost 3-dimensional view. And the moon itself is also engraved, the face. Engraved around the border, again, ringed on the winding holes, highly decorated around the calendar date. Everything very decorative. An English clock of the same period, the dial would be much plainer. It wouldn't have so much decoration. Now, are you a collector of clocks by way, or is this something that...
Well, it's something that I've had for quite some time. And some clocks have been in the house, hence it has increased my appetite for them.
I suppose it would be a very rude question to ask you how much you paid for it.
Well, actually, I bought it privately, so that being the case, I wouldn't like to say.
No. Okay, well, I shall give you a value. Today's market, I think you probably would have to value a clock at that, something in the order of about £10,000.
Thank you very much. That was a surprise.
Beautiful colour.
Terrific. Lovely, lovely colours.
And they're like they're after Amanati or Jambalogna, these.
Yes.
Very mannerist figures.
Yes.
I think they're probably French.
Because
they look at like Annette.
Yes, the whole feeling.
They're called the Fontainebleau.
Yes.
And this is probably meant to be Diana.
I think it's Diana and Ceres. Or...
They're both well, it's Diana and Ceres, but they are Diana de Poitiers and all that.
Yes, yes.
Arrows in her back.
I think they're probably worth all the money. Like £1,500.
You think,
really? What is it?
What
is that what you've got?
Yes.
All this way?
We're not sure.
It's like a Copenhagen sign, isn't it? 3 wavy lines.
Yeah.
But I think it's just pure decoration.
Yeah.
We thought it was sort of German-Austrian. The
And you take it
potting
out.
characteristics on the liner.
It's rather like the sort of Vienna WMF.
Well, it's got all these mould numbers on. It's not English.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything like it before?
Well, yes, it's in better condition.
Yeah, it's
I mean, it would have been in the most
The upper categories of good tin plate toys had been in good condition. I'm just actually trying to think whether it is a German toy. Although you found it in London, it's a German toy. In good condition, we'd be talking about thousands. And in this condition, even in this condition, I mean, it's got to be worth a couple of hundred because it is a really good toy. And
have you read the back? What's it say? Myatt, Son and Company and Hanley. Do you know where Hanley is? Hanley's in Staffordshire in England, which is a very, very famous place for plates like these. And they're worth probably 25 to 30 pounds each. But what you should do, you should go in all the antique shops and see if you can find some more like this.
Tell me, how did your mother come by this?
Well, actually, she bought it at an auction for £2.
For £2, really? Yes. And was it in this condition, or have you just mistreated it because it's...
No, actually, there was a bigger frame on it than that.
Yes.
When we moved house, it actually got broke.
It got broken?
And it was put up in the attic then, and then it was taken down again.
Really? But what about all these little holes?
Long story. Actually, they were done with darts.
Well, I suppose it's not unusual, children playing with darts and all that sort of thing, but it's, in fact, quite honestly, it doesn't really matter. That's minimal damage. It's in perfect condition.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing we can find out about it, which is obvious, is that it's by Jules Tavernier, because here it is signed and dated 1888. If you read the French textbooks, you will find that Jules Tavernier was born probably in the 1830s in Paris. And he lived there, and he studied, and he exhibited a few pictures in the 1860s and 70s. And then he disappears off the face of the earth. But there is a parallel artist who does the same sort of thing, Paul Gauguin, who reappears in Tahiti. The interesting thing about Tavernier is that he reappears in Hawaii. And really, Hawaii has no European artist as such in the 19th century to represent it except one man, Jules Tavernier. And Tavernier was there, and he painted these extraordinary pictures of the Hawaiian volcanoes, which are really rather wonderful if you think of them in that way, and you think that at this time there was nobody else doing it. But if you like, his Hawaii's answer to Gauguin, not in the same manner, and certainly not at the same price, but a very exciting artist. When this picture's cleaned, we will see suddenly come out not only the whole drama of the scene, but you will see this wonderful smoke rising in the foreground, the smoke rising in the background. The whole thing, as it were, will come together. The foreground will come forward, the background will go back, and you will have this beautifully romantic, extraordinary romantic scene of a boiling volcano done in the middle of the 19th century. Although they didn't pay huge amounts of money for his paintings, he is collected, and this is a very good one, a large one, and I would say is probably worth in the region of £10,000 to £15,000.
Who threw the dart?
He's not supposed to do that. It should actually not, the figures here on the dial shouldn't move when the clock strikes. They should move when the pendulum's moving. So obviously at some time in its history, they've been disconnected from the pendulum and connected to the strike. But they should actually, all these little men here, should be hammering away in their workshop all the time the clock's running, and not just when it strikes. Anyway, it's fascinating because this is a day for Dutch clocks. There's a marvellous Dutch long case here. And now this clock, which although it's signed by Thomas Jackson of London, it was either made in England for the Dutch market or made in Holland for the English market, because there are certain characteristics which denote it as having Dutch connections. Most of all is the dial, which has this arcaded minute ring. We call it arcaded minute ring. It's where the minutes, instead of being a plain circle, they're actually done in arcades. And indeed, the scene, the painted scene in the top with the shoeing shop and the smith shop are very typical of Dutch clocks. Also the size, it's a large size of clock. There is a record of Thomas Jackson working in London in the end of the 17th century. He was in the Clockmakers' Company, I think, 1688. But this clock has got to date from somewhere closer to about 1740. It's on the large size, as I say, And it's got these finials on the top here, which I think have probably been added later. There was a fashion at the early part of this century for black clocks to put finials on the top to make them more decorative. It was just a standard practice amongst dealers, even collectors, to decorate them up a bit. If we turn it round, we can see maybe why the automaton has been connected now to the striking rather than the going chain. This has been converted, this clock, from verge escapement to an anchor escapement, and even by just looking at it, it becomes quite evident. This enormously oversized pendulum, which is typical for an anchor escapement. Originally, it would have had a small bob pendulum and a verge escapement. And as I said, apart from just the technical aspect of it, it also covers up, this pendulum covers up a large amount of the fine engraving on the back. But it was common practice in the 19th century, in the 18th century, even to convert the clocks from the verge escapement to the much more reliable anchor escapement. And nowadays, collectors go and put them back to what it was before. So,
it should be a smaller pendulum.
It should be a little, just a little bob on a wire, which would be permanently connected to the verge escapement. Yes. And here you've got a large locking nut that's actually been also, in fact, a word of warning before you take it home. Let's put that in there, because that is actually to lock the pendulum secure, so that it doesn't knock about when you're moving.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Black clocks, large black clocks, are a bit out of fashion at the moment, but the saving grace is the automaton, which is a rare feature. So whereas you perhaps would say £2,000 for this clock, normally, because of the automaton, you could certainly double it, £4,000 to £5,000.
Pair of Austrian candlesticks, very much in the style of Ernst Wallisch, an Austrian maker of, I suppose, very Art Nouveau with this lovely sinuous form. They're very, very sweet, rather beautiful, and I suppose in date about 1900. They're not frighteningly valuable. I suppose we're going to be about £300-400, something like that. But they're rather pretty. Yeah. This dish is very, very beautiful. It's made by Pratt of Fenton. In a wonderful process called colour printing, developed by Jesse Austin. Interestingly, his name is down here on this dish here. Jesse Austin was the originator of these things. He worked at Davenport, first of all, and thought up this process of printing in colour. This isn't printed and painted over, or printed in a lithograph. This is printed in lots of little tiny bits of colours, which are put on in little stages, and rather like a jigsaw puzzle, built up. Extremely complicated, and this was one of the great successes of a new process shown at the Great Exhibition of 1851. And this actual dish, well, not this dish, but a similar one, with the same pattern of Christ in the cornfields, was actually shown at the Great Exhibition and caused a great excitement. How did you acquire it?
My mother bought it at a chumble sale.
Did she?
In the old Gate Hall, Florence Court.
Oh, Florence Court, yes. Great place, yes.
And it originally came out of Florence Court Castle.
Yes.
And I think it was a give out in a mistake.
Oh.
Because the lady that walked in it said that it shouldn't have been at the sale, that there was another one, a comrade of it.
Yes.
And my mother bought it for £0.50.
Well, a very nice £0.50 worth. I think probably that £0.50 has increased to about £250-300 or so by now. So this, I think, is the ultimate in craftsmanship. This is, of course, as I'm sure you know, Balik from our local town. We've had a lot of Balik here. I'm going to pick it up and enjoy this piece enormously. So I think the quality of making is really quite magnificent. Has the first period Balik mark, about 1870, something like that. And the mirror is framed with hand-modelled lilies of the valley, which are quite superb. When you think that all these leaves, all these flowers, are individually fashioned by fingers and then built and formed on top of that porcelain by hand, I think it's a miracle of craftsmanship. Has it been used as a mirror all the time?
Well, not really. My late father, when times weren't so good, used to shave with it.
Any idea what it's worth?
I wouldn't have any idea.
There was one sold over in the United States a year or so ago, and it went for several £1,000s. So You're looking at a piece which is, you know, going to be at least that. I should think £2,500. So, not used as a mirror for shaving anymore, but used with love and hung somewhere very safely.
I didn't think it.
So it's a surprise.
It certainly is a surprise.
And so I'm afraid we come to the end of our brief visit to Enniskillen. We've had a marvellous day here, and you know, the thing I think I'll remember most about our time in this part of Northern Ireland is the sense of humour of the local people here. A woman came in this morning and she said, the thing about Fermanagh is that for 3 months of the year, the lakes are in Fermanagh, and for the other 9 months, Fermanagh is in the lakes because it rains so much. Actually, that's not been our experience at all. It's been a fine day in every sense of the word, and our warm thanks to the people of this part of Northern Ireland. Oh, and incidentally, just before we go, a quick reference back to Farnham, where we were, if you remember, last week, and Simon Bull saw there what he thought was a 16th century gold plaque. Well, we've now had a second opinion on it, and it's absolutely confirmed that Simon was right first time, including his valuation of between £30,000 and £50,000. So it was a major discovery for the Antiques Roadshow. Who knows what we'll find next week at the same time when we're in Wiltshire. I very much hope that you'll join us then. Until then, from all of us here in Northern Ireland, goodbye.